Hello there. My name is Paul Glumaz, and I'm representing General Welfare Presents. I have been a 46-year veteran of the political movement of Lyndon LaRouche, and we are entering the final 92 days before the November 4th general election. What I want to concentrate on right now is something that is very important. It has a lot to do with everything that's going on, and that is the complex USChina relationship, which is now going into a situation where the U.S. Congress, the Republicans in the Senate, and the State Department, Mike Pompeo, Esper, also Bill Barr of the Attorney General, they are all coming out in a massive frontal verbal assault on China, which includes the closing of the Houston consulate of China. Now, what Bill Barr is saying, what Pompeo is saying, is that the Belt and Road is the greatest threat to enslave the world, to put the world under the control of the Communist Party of China, etc., 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 etc. In fact, Pompeo said, if we don't act now, ultimately our children's children will be at the mercy of the Chinese Communist Party. General Secretary Xi is not destined to tyrannize inside and outside China forever, unless we allow it. Now, if you understand the Chinese at all, this kind of verbal attack, these kind of verbal assaults are very problematic, because in that culture, you don't do open confrontations like that. You don't make these kind of statements. And these statements are completely off the wall. So what is going on? Now, Xi Jinping announced the idea of the vast infrastructure development outside of China, connecting all of Eurasia, ultimately the Middle East and Africa, called the Belt and Road. That was 7 years ago. For 5 years, no discussion of it in the West, in Western media. Then a little bit about 2 years ago. But now it's the enemy. And why is the Belt and Road the enemy? Because it represents a new system, a new physical economic system, which is competing with the existing with the current system, which is collapsing. Now, to understand this properly, so there's a campaign going on to elicit opposition to China in Africa, to elicit opposition to China in Asia, in Europe, in the Middle East. There's an effort to get India to shift into an alliance with Japan and Australia and the U.S. against China. And Turkey is being used to force a massive influx and destabilization in both the Middle East and in Libya, to prevent the Belt and Road from coming in. Through expanded wars in North Africa and the Middle East, the targeted disintegration of Lebanon, and the ongoing operations in Syria, including targeting a conflict between the Turkic population of Azerbaijan and the Armenian population of Armenia, this is all being orchestrated and triggered against China. And part of the all-out campaign is to force Boris Johnson, who favored having the Huawei relationship with China, to back down on that. And the same is the campaign claim that China either created or was responsible for the coronavirus. China is being blamed for it all. China's being blamed for everything. Wall Street and the City of London are not culpable, are not the cause of the problem. It's China. China's the cause of the problem. And you're getting the drumbeat everywhere. China's the cause of the problem. This is the campaign rhetoric of both the Democrats and the Republicans. This is their campaign rhetoric. More so the Republicans, openly. So, what's happening here? Well, China is being attacked because it is precisely the end of the system. China is a very core component of the imperial system. It is a partnership with the global system that allowed China to exploit its cheap labor, ultimately to gain the means to be able to develop. And so, essentially, China is part of the system, yet the Belt and Road is opposite to the system. So China is both in the system and is functioning within the international financial system with all that means, at the same time that the Belt and Road is threatening the system. Trump, in 2018, began the tariffs to try to end the rules-based order of multilateral trade agreements, and so that nations could actually negotiate with each other bilateral trade agreements that would be better for nations than what currently exists. That was not supported by China, but nonetheless, the tariffs began to tear up this whole relationship. So Trump is acting against the system, but he's still under Wall Street and the City of London. So he's also in the system. So the Chinese are in the system, and Trump is in the system. But Trump is fighting the system, and the Chinese are fighting the system. So obviously what's required is for the U.S. and China to sit down and say, okay, what is it that we want for our nations in such a manner as to satisfy the needs of both nations. And this would be the beginning of a new architecture, a new paradigm, a new everything. That's why things are so critical between the U.S. and China, because it is the intention of the British crowd, which has created this system that trapped everyone, to essentially prevent that discussion from going on. Now, what is the British Empire angle on this? And I'll go into this. And their massive networks of agents and operatives and what have you, and finance. Their major thing is this. When they started illegally creating the offshore financial system in the 50s and 60s, leading to the breakdown of the Bretton Woods and the establishment of a system called the floating exchange system based on speculation. Those who created that system fully understood that in a matter of time, the eventuality will be a collapse of that system. And the idea was to get everyone sucked into it. Everyone. Don't leave anybody out. Okay? And get them all sucked in. And then prepare for a new system while you're getting everybody sucked into the old system, to the existing system, the post-Bretton Woods floating exchange system, which actually became in place in 1973. But at the same time, in 1973-74, they began to lay the groundwork for the alternative system when the collapse occurs. And that alternative system is based upon a Malthusian or neo-Malthusian worldview, which is preventing development and preventing the ability of nations to develop, to put them under a straitjacket where they must maintain a very primitive existence and not in a primary industrial form. So that's when the whole campaign about the world becoming overpopulated begins. And that's when the whole green movement gets underway. And to this end, the criminal who had to hide in China because he was stealing the money with Kofi Annan from the Israeli Children's Fund, Maurice Strong, when he was at the United Nations and he was number 2 at the United Nations, he put together the IPCC, which is the Global Warming Scare Organization, and he picked carbon dioxide as the pollutant to be dealt with because that would give you the power to stop development. And he says that. And he's very open about it. He's not saying, he's very open. He also started this whole Agenda 21 thing in 1991, I believe. 1990. So this whole creeping green is preparation for when the system collapses. Then what you do is you let all the financial stuff get wiped out. You have that wipeout, but then you redirect it, whatever new credit from the government into the green projects. Okay, and maybe you'll throw in some kind of universal income to pacify people. But that's the kind of direction that they want to go in. That's their policy, and they've got all the international banks lined up for this, all the major central banks lined up for this. They got Europe starting to move towards an end to the sovereignty altogether of the nation states and a unified European budget and a political unity, which is the end of any sovereignty for any nation of Europe. They're moving on all these fronts to consolidate a post-crash universe based on the Green New Deal. The entire Democratic Party has gone with the Green New Deal. Donald Trump is not in agreement. He summarily refused to sign on to the Paris Climate Accord, number 1. And number 2, he's made it very clear that he considers the whole global warming thing to be a fraud, and that he considers the whole Green New Deal as to be the destruction of the nation. Okay, to his credit, he's being honest and direct about the realities of this. I am certain that many of the Democrats who are going along with the new Green New Deal are aware of the economic consequences of the destruction to the society. Either 1, they don't care. 2, they think it's a good idea to do that because it reduces the world's population. Or 3, they're scared. They don't want to go against the tide that's been massively created through propaganda over a period of almost 50 years, 45 years. So that's the situation. Now, the relationship between the U.S. and China goes back to the period when China was isolated. They were undergoing the Cultural Revolution, and Kissinger made a secret trip to China in 1971. And in 1971, the United Nations agreed to transfer the permanent seat on the UN's security to China from the ROC, the Republic of China's, which is based out of Taiwan. And then Nixon did a trip in 72, and they began the process of normalization, and final recognition and normalization of relations occurred on January 1st, 1979. And then in 1980, Deng Xiaoping launched the economic reforms that created the special zones along the coast of China. And this is when he began to join. That's when China began to join the multilateral institutions of the international world system, the IMF and the World Bank, eventually joining the WTO 20 years later. Now, the economic side of this process since 1980 was 40 years ago. China became the producer of consumer goods based on its vast labor force and competitive wages. After 10 years, there appeared to be a huge dislocation crisis in China as millions and millions of people were flocking into these zones. To counter that, by 1994, China initiates Hamiltonian-style policy banks to deal with funding massive infrastructure development as a counter to this dislocation. Between 1993 and 1997, China was in discussions with the LaRouche movement on the Belt and what became the Belt and Road. In 1997, you had the Battle of Hong Kong financially, where Soros organized all of the financial speculators to hit all the currencies of Asia and try to break these countries. In the whole process of the special situation with Hong Kong, the way China got a lot of the technology was that its special, state-owned enterprises set up in Hong Kong, and they had access to goods that were forbidden to China because the Chinese could re-engineer those goods and so forth. So a lot of the high technology goods were banned from going into China. They did not have access to them, but they did through Hong Kong. But on the other side, the international elite had potential to recruit Chinese communist billionaires, because the Chinese could take their money out of China. They could convert it in Hong Kong to a Hong Kong currency and then use it, take it out into the rest of the world. So Hong Kong was a way to corrupt China, but it was also a way for China to get development. So that's the significance of Hong Kong. Of course, things have changed in the period ahead. At that time, Hong Kong was the most developed place for banking and what have you, and it became ultimately the third largest banking center in the world. But there was a shift in China away from the Chinese billionaires and the liberals, with the ascendancy of Xi Jinping, who then began to tighten things up and go to the restore the Communist Party through a massive wave of crackdown on corruption. So the Communist Party began to be tightened up because otherwise this liberal Western faction would have taken over China. So now what you got to understand is that China is disliked among the population because they blame China for the loss of jobs. Well, Donald Trump says, no, China's not at fault. They shouldn't be blamed. The corporations and the leadership of the West should be blamed. Okay. China took advantage of that situation, but it wasn't their situation. So what happened, but on the other hand, the U.S. population is getting Chinese goods at a reasonable price, or has been getting Chinese goods. Walmart, all these companies exist because of China. So you have to ask yourself, so this is what's being played out. So China is not seen as friendly in the U.S. population, and thus it becomes the basis of the Republican Senate campaigns to demonize China and blame everything on China, and blame China even to go so far as to begin blaming China for the unrest, the Antifa, trying to link China to Antifa and so on and so forth. And this is ridiculous. George Soros is a major funder of all of this. He's also the major funder of the operations against China. And it's the Obama resist apparatus, which you're seeing in Antifa. You're seeing it well coordinated, with Soros' money going to buy the mayors and the police chiefs and so forth and so on, the sheriffs, the elected sheriffs, so that they could conduct this unrest and not have it taken down. Already, they're planning to defund the Seattle Police Department and give the money to all these mediating, therapy or whatever institutions, civil institutions, which is exactly the end of the power of the state to control, to keep law and order and to protect the population. Now if you develop this in all these cities, now you have gangs that can go around targeting people and nothing can be done about it. And people will have to just keep their mouth shut and hide. So we're seeing the beginnings, the bare beginnings of a kind of Nazi-type brown shirt emerging with the Antifa and with the green equivalent. So this is now being, and by defunding the police, you're actually creating a basis for this, so that the way it gets dealt with is you have these, psychologists come in and they want to, be nice, and, let's talk about it and all of that. And so this creates an environment where people can be targeted, political opponents can be targeted and killed or threatened. And so you're looking at a Biden presidency as a third Obama presidency as a reign of terror. Okay, and with the NDAA, there's provisions in the NDAA, the National Defense Act. Okay, you have essentially provisions in there that they can quietly take people away, and you never know what happened to them. That is now a legal potential in the U.S. So China is both part of the system and is also opposing the system. And Trump is part of the system and is also opposing the system. So you have to ask yourself, what happened philosophically and culturally to the Democratic Party? In 10 years, they have become completely degenerate. The media, completely degenerate. And the population has revolted against both parties. But they don't have a government yet. They have Donald Trump. But they don't have a government. And the government is presidentless. It doesn't have a president that represents the government. The government doesn't have a president that represents it. And the nation has a president not represented by the government. And this goes back to the House of Lords report saying that they could contain a one-term Donald Trump, but they can't contain a two-term Donald Trump. And so the entire human species survival depends on the second term, the actual coming into being of a second term of Donald Trump. But if you go outside the U.S., outside of the population that supports Trump, like you go to Germany or a place like that, they perceive Donald Trump as something worse than Hitler. If you say you are sympathetic to Donald Trump in a place like Germany, you are beyond the pale. This is how the world is being. This is how the U.S. president is being presented to the rest of the world. So this is the kind of crisis that we're in. Now, if the U.S. doesn't come up with some kind of package, which has not happened yet, the Republicans have gone. The Senate has gone for recess. The Senate has gone for recess. There's going to be a lot of angry people in September because they're going to run out of money. You're going to have foreclosures. You're going to have a whole fight around that. You have a lot of different fights going on. And so you have to ask yourself, how is this going to be dealt with? Donald Trump wants to deal with it with a massive infrastructure program, but the Congress won't support that. The Republicans won't support it in the Senate, and the Democrats want the Green New Deal. They don't want a real economic development. So we're at a real crisis point in the world and in this crisis. And meanwhile, Pompeo and all these people are pushing for war with China. Well, are they really pushing for war with China? Are they trying to bluff a nuclear war against China to get China to agree to the Green New Deal, shared power with the empire, and China then becomes part of the empire, a configuration of part of the empire. And the way they want to force it is by threatening to nuke China, a nuclear war. And then that brings in the whole issue of Russia. So it's a very complicated situation as we go into this situation. And we have an American population on which all of this rests when they go to vote. And then the question of how much vote fraud there is and how much vote fraud there's not is a factor. So, and then the question is, will there actually be a resolution to the election after November 4th? Will it go into courts? Will it be contested? Will it be contested at the electoral college level? Will it be contested in Congress when Congress convenes, a new Congress convenes? All of this is up in the air. We're going into a perfect storm. And it's very important that the truth about the Russia hack being fraud, which is now openly being discussed in the alternative media, becomes exposed. And this is what happened last Saturday, where Bill Binney, the technical director of the NSA, and Roger Stone were on a discussion website with Barbara Boyd, the LaRouche movement's security and counterintelligence expert, and so we're in the process now of organizing to break the whole Russia hoax thing, because that's at the cornerstone of the narrative that Russia interfered in the elections, is at the cornerstone of the narrative of everything that's going on. So I'm going to stop there and wish you the best, and hope that you tune in next week.